I built everything I have from scratch, and I mean that literally. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Brantford, Ontario, with my mom working double shifts at a grocery store and my dad driving trucks across the border 6 days a week. We weren't poor, not the kind of poor people romanticize. We were the kind of poor where you pray the furnace holds out one more winter, where you eat cereal for dinner twice a week and call it breakfast for supper, like it's a fun choice. I knew from the time I was 12 that nobody was handing me anything. So I worked. I put myself through nursing school at McMaster. Student loans, part-time at a Tim Hortons that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, and a shared apartment in Hamilton with 2 other girls where we kept the heat at 17 degrees and wore sweaters indoors from October to April. But I graduated. I got my RN. I got hired at a hospital in Toronto within 3 months, and by 29, I was a charge nurse on a surgical unit. I had a 1-bedroom condo near Leslieville that I was actually paying a mortgage on. Not renting, buying. That's who I am. My name is Charlotte, and I think that's exactly why his family never liked me. I met my boyfriend at a friend's birthday dinner. He was at the table next to ours, and he leaned over to say our laughter was contagious. It sounds like a line, but the way he said it, slightly embarrassed, like he surprised himself by saying anything at all, made me think he actually meant it. His name was Sebastian. He was 32, worked in commercial real estate downtown, and had the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to worry about the furnace. I didn't hold that against him. Not then. We dated for 8 months before he introduced me to his family. 8 months, which I now understand was him preparing them, not me. His parents lived in Forest Hill. The house was the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. No flashy landscaping, no grand entrance. Just solid old money, quiet. The kind of house that says we've been here for generations and we're not going anywhere. His mother, who I'll call his mother throughout this because she never really became anything warmer than that to me, met us at the door wearing a blazer. On a Sunday, for a family lunch, that was the first signal I missed. His father shook my hand and said it was nice to finally put a face to the name. His mother kissed Sebastian on both cheeks, looked at me and said, "Charlotte, what a practical name." I smiled. Sebastian squeezed my hand. His sister, who was 26 and had never held a job longer than 8 months, spent the lunch asking me pointed questions disguised as curiosity. Where exactly in Brantford? What did my parents do? Did I rent or own? When I said was a pause that lasted 2 seconds too long, and she said, "Oh, good for you," in the same tone people use when a child shows them a drawing. I left that lunch with a headache and told myself I was being oversensitive. Sebastian said his family just took time to warm up. I believed him because I was at Christmas. I brought wine, a good bottle, Taw's Pinot Noir from Niagara because I'd done my research. His mother accepted it, said lovely, and put it in a cabinet. They served something else with dinner. I noticed. I didn't say anything. The third dinner is the one I need to tell you about. It was a Saturday in late March, one of those days that pretends it might be spring but still drops to 4 degrees by sunset. Sebastian picked me up around 6. I remember being in a good mood. I'd had a good week at work, I'd just refinanced my mortgage at a better rate, and I was wearing a new green dress that I felt genuinely good in. We stopped for flowers, tulips, because his mother had mentioned once that she liked them. Dinner started fine. His father asked me about a news story he'd seen about hospital understaffing. I explained the situation, the funding gaps, the retention problems, the impact of nurses leaving for travel contracts in the States. He nodded seriously. I thought maybe we were turning a corner. Then his mother brought up the lake house. His family had a property on Lake Muskoka. They'd been going there every summer for 30 years. Sebastian had mentioned it to me, and I'd assumed that eventually I might be invited. His mother began describing the renovation they were planning, a new dock, an expanded deck, and she spoke entirely to Sebastian. The plans, the costs, the timeline. She used the word we exclusively, meaning herself, her husband, Sebastian, and his sister. I sat at that table and understood, without anyone saying it, that I was not part of that we. That I was a guest at a table where the long-term future did not include me. I reached for my wine and drank a little more than I normally would have. About an hour and a half into the evening, I started to feel strange. Not dizzy, not exactly. More like the edges of everything went soft. I'd had 2 glasses of wine over the course of an hour and a half, which is nothing for me. But suddenly, the conversation around me sounded like it was coming from further away than it should. I pressed my feet into the floor to ground myself. I told myself I was tired, that 12-hour shifts catch up with you. I excused myself to use the washroom, and in the mirror I looked completely normal, but I felt like I was watching myself from a slight distance. I came back to the table. I tried to follow the conversation, and then I don't remember anything until I woke up on the couch in his parents' living room with a blanket over me and the house quiet. The first thing I had noticed was that my dress was wrinkled in a way it hadn't been when I arrived. The second thing I noticed was that the zipper at the back, which closes with a small metal hook, was done up wrong. The hook was worn that dress twice before. I know exactly how it closes. Someone had opened it and reclosed it incorrectly. I sat up slowly. My head felt like gauze. Sebastian was in the armchair across from me on his phone. When he saw me stir, he came over and said I'd fallen asleep at the table and he'd carried me to the couch. He said it lightly, almost amused, like it was a funny story. I asked how long I'd been out. He said about 90 minutes. I am a nurse. I know what it feels like to be tired. I know what it feels like to have 2 glasses of wine, and I know with absolute certainty that what I experienced that night was neither of those things. I didn't say that to Sebastian. I said I felt much better and could we please go home. In the car, I was quiet. He turned on the radio. At a red light at Eglinton and Avenue Road, I looked at him and said, "Did anyone touch me while I was asleep?" He kept his eyes on the road. He said, "What? No, of course not." My parents were in the kitchen. My sister went home. I said, "My dress was re-zipped wrong." He said, "You probably just moved around in your sleep." That was when I knew, not that something had definitely happened, but that if something had happened, I would not be getting the truth from him. I went home that night and sat on my bathroom floor for a long time. I was a charge nurse. I understood drug facilitation. I understood exactly what flunitrazepam or GHB could do to a person in a social setting, how quickly they could render someone unconscious, how short the detection window was. The rational part of my brain was already calculating. The human part of me was trying not to fall apart. I called my best friend, who I'd known since nursing school. She was at my door within 40 minutes. She asked me a series of questions in a very calm voice, the same way you triage a patient. When did you start feeling it? What had you eaten? How much did you drink exactly? She asked about the drink, who had poured it, whether I'd ever set it down, whether I'd watched it the entire time. I hadn't. I'd gone to the washroom. She said I needed a urine sample and I needed it now, not in the morning, now. She drove me to a walk-in clinic that was still open and we asked directly for a drug facilitation screen. The nurse practitioner on duty was matter-of-fact about it. She'd seen this before. She told me the window for detecting most substances was narrow, 24 to 72 hours depending on the drug, and that we were doing the right thing coming in immediately. We drove home, and my friend stayed the night, sleeping on my couch. I didn't sleep at all. The results came back 3 days later. Traces of a benzodiazepine, not the kind I'd been prescribed, not the kind I'd ever taken. A class of sedative that is tasteless in liquid and has an amnesiac effect. The clinic referred me to the police. I filed a report. The officer who took my statement was a woman about my age. She listened to everything without interrupting me once. But filing the report and proving something are very different things. I hadn't seen anyone put anything in my drink. I had no footage. The physical evidence was already weakening by the time we'd gotten to the clinic. The officer told me they would investigate, but I needed to understand that without a clear chain of custody pointing to a specific person, the case would be difficult. I understood. I was not going to wait for the justice system to figure it out. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in the relationship. I know how that sounds. I need you to understand something about where I was. I had no proof of who had done this. I knew something had happened to me. I knew Sebastian's explanation made no sense. But the specific person, the specific moment, the specific hand that had touched a glass, I didn't have that. And if I walked away then, whoever did this would face nothing. I was not willing to let that happen. I also went very quiet. I stopped sharing things with Sebastian. I started paying attention. I noticed that his mother called him every single day. Not unusual for some families, but the calls were long, and when he'd come back into the room afterward, there was sometimes a shift in how he looked at me. A slight recalibration. I noticed his sister had begun following me on social media, despite having been cool to me in person. She was watching my posts. I posted normally, carefully, gave them nothing. I reached out to an old colleague who had left nursing to work in healthcare compliance. She had access to resources I didn't. I asked her, hypothetically, what someone might be looking for if they wanted to find out what a nurse knew or documented. She asked me why I was asking. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Have you checked your work email from outside the hospital network recently?" I had not. But that question made me go check. I found something I almost missed. In my sent folder, there were 3 emails I had not sent. They were addressed to a generic contact address, and they contained screenshots of my work schedule and a partial copy of a patient file that should never have left the hospital system. My login credentials had been used to send them at 2:14 a.m. on a Wednesday while I was asleep. Someone had accessed my work account remotely, and they had sent information that, if reported, could have ended my nursing license. I sat in front of my laptop for a very long time, and then I called the hospital's IT security line. Let me tell you what I know about healthcare data breaches in Canada. Under PCP, the Personal Health Information Protection Act, unauthorized access to patient records is not a slap on the wrist. It is a reportable offense. It carries fines. And for the nurse whose credentials were used, the investigation falls on them first until proven otherwise. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to build a case to discredit me, or to blackmail me into silence. I traced the login. It came from an IP address registered to a business in Forest Hill, the same neighborhood where Sebastian's parents lived. I did not tell Sebastian any of this. I called a lawyer. A real one, not a friend of a friend. A woman who specialized in privacy law and had handled PHP cases before. She walked me through what I had, what I needed, and what my options were. She was direct and thorough and did not minimize anything. I left her office with a plan. The plan required patience I wasn't sure I had, but I had been patient my entire life. I had been patient through 2 glasses of cereal for dinner. I had been patient through 17-degree winters in an apartment with no insulation. I knew how to wait. Sebastian invited me to his parents' place for Easter dinner. His entire extended family would be there, he said. An aunt and uncle from Ottawa, his grandfather who was visiting from Victoria, old family friends. I said I'd love to come. I spent the week before that dinner making sure everything was in order. My lawyer had spoken to the Privacy Commissioner's office. The police investigator had a completed file. My IT security contact had documented the breach formally. My colleague in compliance had written a statement, and I had hired a security firm, 2 people who would be on the street outside the house and 1 who would be in the neighborhood. I also bought a new blazer, navy, structured. If I was walking into that house one last time, I was doing it looking like someone they had underestimated. Easter dinner in a Forest Hill house is exactly what you'd imagine. The dining table seated 14. There was lamb, there was a cheese course, there were conversations about golf club memberships and a condo development in Collingwood. I sat next to Sebastian's aunt from Ottawa, who was genuinely lovely and kept asking me questions about the nursing shortage with real interest. For a moment I let myself exist in that conversation and breathe. Then dessert came. His mother stood to make a small toast. She talked about family, about traditions, about what it meant to protect the people you love. She looked at Sebastian as she said it, and she looked at me for just a beat longer than felt comfortable, and I knew she was telling me something. She thought she had won. I waited until she sat down. Then I said quietly, I need to share something as well, if no one minds. The table went still. Sebastian looked at me with an expression I can only describe as alarm, wearing the mask of curiosity. I said I'd had a difficult few weeks, and I wanted to be transparent with the people at the table, since they were people Sebastian considered family. I said that in late March, I had become ill after having a drink at this house, and that subsequent testing had confirmed the presence of a sedative in my system that I had not taken voluntarily. I said that I had filed a report with the Toronto Police Service, and that the investigation was ongoing. I said this calmly in the same tone I used to explain a care plan to a patient's family. The table erupted. His mother said I was making a serious accusation. His father said this was not the place. His sister said I had always been like this. Sebastian said my name, just my name, twice, in a way that told me he had known something. I held up my hand. I said I wasn't finished. I told them that additionally, someone had used my hospital login credentials to access and transmit protected patient information. I told them that the IP address linked to that access had been traced to a business registered in Forest Hill. I told them that the Privacy Commissioner's office and the hospital's legal team had been notified, and that I had legal counsel present, though not in the room. Then I put my phone on the table with a message visible on the screen. It was from my lawyer. It said the documents had been submitted. The room was very quiet. Sebastian's father looked at his wife. His mother looked at the table. His sister started to say something and stopped. Sebastian said, Charlotte. Just that. I said, You carried me to the couch, Sebastian. You told me I'd been asleep for 90 minutes. But my dress was re-zipped by someone who didn't know how it closed, and you didn't ask me a single question about how I was feeling. Not one. He didn't say anything to that, which was, in its own way, the confirmation I'd been waiting for. The police had been contacted before I walked in. Not to make an arrest at the dinner table, but because my lawyer had advised that making this statement publicly, in front of witnesses, was part of the formal record. What happened after was not in my hands, and it didn't need to be. His mother, as it turned out, had a business, a private event planning company incorporated under a holding company, which is why the IP address had been registered to a business rather than a residential address. She had accessed my work system using login details her son had provided. The sedative that had been found in my system was traced to a prescription she held under a name that took investigators 2 months to fully document. His sister received a formal caution. She had known. She had left the house that night before I woke up, but she had known. Sebastian cooperated with investigators in exchange for terms I wasn't privy to and didn't ask about. I had no interest in his outcome. I had already made my decision about him on the night of that Easter dinner, when he said my name twice and couldn't manage a single sentence in my defense. The nursing college investigation cleared me within 6 weeks. The breach was documented as external and unauthorized. My record was clean. My manager, who had been quietly supportive through the whole process without knowing the details, simply said, "Good," when I showed her the clearance letter, and went back to her charting. I sold my condo 14 months later, not because of any of this, but because I got a position in a hospital in Vancouver that I'd been working toward for 2 years. I packed my things into a moving pod, dropped my keys with the new owners, and drove my car to my parents' house in Brantford for the last night before my flight. My dad made spaghetti for dinner. My mom bought a cheesecake from the grocery store where she used to work. We sat at the same kitchen table I'd grown up at, the same one with the wobbly left leg that had been wobbly since I was in elementary school, and they asked me about the new hospital, the new neighborhood, whether I'd found an apartment yet. I had, a rental for now, near False Creek. New start. My mom said she was proud of me. My dad said he'd always known I could handle anything. He said it like it was simple, like it was just a fact, the way you'd say the sky is blue. I didn't tell them most of what had happened. I didn't need to. I had handled it exactly the way they'd raised me to. Quietly, carefully, and with every piece of evidence in order before I ever opened my mouth. Some people mistake patience for weakness. They see a woman who keeps showing up, who keeps smiling, who doesn't make a scene, and they think they can keep pushing. They don't realize that the woman who grew up at 17 degrees and wore sweaters indoors all winter doesn't need warmth from anyone who isn't willing to give it freely. She just needs time. And she has learned from a very early age how to wait.